Experiencing the Uncharted series for the first time in 2020 has been a cathartic, therapeutic, and truly magical adventure. I imagine this must have been what it would have felt like for those who managed to escape Plato's allegorical cave and finally experience the true world in all its glory. What I am trying to say is that I have finally come out of the dark, that being my poorly lit bedroom, and back into the world as a more realised gamer. Okay, let's tone down the metaphors for just a second. Today we're going to take a deep dive into the wealth of narrative and gameplay riches that Uncharted 4: A Thief's End has to offer. I will at times draw comparisons to other games in the series, so if you haven't yet experienced the first four games, I strongly suggest you do so, as this video will be littered with spoilers throughout. The only game safe from this is The Lost Legacy, which I'll cover in a separate video. This critique will be divided into 3 parts, and we will look at the game thematically rather than chronologically. I also switch between Nathan and Nate more than the Big Show switches between face and heel, so please just be mindful of that. And without any further intermissions, let's take a retrospective look at Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. Part 1. Strength in its characters. The Uncharted series plots are not deep. The games do not attempt to try and provide a thought-provoking, philosophical experience. The series ultimately is, at its core, akin to a summer blockbuster cosplaying as an Indiana Jones-inspired globe-trotting adventure. Wow, that's a lot of words. I could have just said it was an action game. Uncharted 4 starts out in familiar fashion, throwing you into the deep end with a contextless boat chase, with Drake and an unfamiliar face, Sam. The action is fast and frantic in what we as players of the series have come to expect. However, this sequence is short-lived. The game then takes us to a flashback that foreshadows the game's true nature, as a character-driven story that forsakes frequent grandiose set pieces, explosions and shootouts, in place of a more somber tale. And I am so pleased that this is the direction Naughty Dog took. Never in the series have I felt so connected to Nate and his motley crew. Every interaction between the lead characters is rich and memorable, full of quick-witted banter, emotional revelations, and Sully, what a guy. This is a testament to the excellent writing and voice work that has brought these characters alive once again. Even the antagonists this time feel like actual people, rather than cultists, roided warlords, and Eddie? Okay, we all probably know a douche like Eddie. Needless to say, all this work has led to this being, in my humble opinion, the absolute best Uncharted story. They even managed to introduce a character whose existence certainly should have been referenced before, in Sam, but due to the excellent voice acting of Troy Baker and the direction of the early game missions, Sam's inclusion does not feel at all contrived, and he fits in almost too well. It is evident that Naughty Dog made a concerted effort here to make the characters feel as human as possible, with a deliberate and frequent slow pace, long cutscenes, and new gameplay mechanics such as the expanded journaling system and the new optional conversations. One great scene that well reflects Naughty Dog's efforts is found early on in the game, in one of my personal favourite chapters, A Normal Life. This chapter, uncharacteristically for Uncharted, does not feature any shooting, big set pieces, or cliffside parkour, the 3 pillars of the series' gameplay. However, it is instead packed with excellent character building and foreshadowing. Nathan and Elena are sat eating dinner, something I can't ever recall these characters doing. Quick side note, I do wonder on their adventures at what point they find a good opportunity to use a restroom. I'll try not to think about that. Needless to say, the premise of the scene is simple, if not on the surface mundane, but this framing works excellently in capturing the current state of Nate and Elena's relationship. During dinner, Elena's talking about her work, which Nate is evidently not interested in. Instead, his eyes and mind are drawn to an image on the wall that speaks of a past adventure, or rather, the other life he left behind. The scene is tense, yet nothing in the moment comes from it. Aside from a surprisingly enjoyable Crash Bandicoot excursion, we can see the amazing chemistry these two have. Hey, don't take my word for it.
Play you for it.
You'll play me for it?
Yeah, your little TV game thing. I bet I can beat your high score. Say, chicken, is it a bet?
Oh, wow. Okay, cowboy.
Okay, watch and learn.
Oh, I'm learning, all right.
Is this it?
No, it has to load.
Load?
Yes.
This is taking a really long time.
You have no patience.
When you turn something on, you expect it to... Okay, here we go. Crash Bandicoot.
Is there a problem?
No, just, how do you make it go?
Push the start button.
I knew that.
All right.
I got it.
Okay, so you want to run towards the camera.
Run to the camera. Got it.
And the circle button is your spin attack.
Spin attack!
Okay, run away from the boulder.
Why is the boulder chasing me? Oh, what happened?
You fell in the pit.
I don't know. How do I, climb back up?
You're dead.
Well, that's not realistic. I would have climbed back up.
Hey, are you happy?
Yeah, of course. You? Really?
Come here.
By framing the scene in this way, it does not only hint at the later conflict that will come as a result of Nathan's desire for one last adventure, but also shows the bond that these two have. Unlike the previous games where Nathan and Elena's on-again, off-again relationship is half-baked and almost an afterthought at times, we feel here that there is a lot more at stake. We've seen the bond they have, and so any intimation that this relationship may become damaged or lost immediately adds a new dimension to this forthcoming adventure and a sense of true consequence. We know that one way or another, that this is Nathan's last adventure, given the game's namesake. And as such, there has to be a payoff to this scene, and of course, there is. For the sake of brevity and efficiency, I'm not going to detail every last dynamic found in this game. However, I will speak about a few more instances that show how much development is given to the core cast, barring Nadine, which we will get to, and the excellent follow through of each plot thread. As I mentioned earlier, Sam is a character that has been thrown into the franchise just before the end. We as players know that his incarnation as a video game character only came during the development of Uncharted 4, yet again as I mentioned before, the excellent writing and characterization given during his introduction aided me greatly as a player into buying into the idea that he always existed in this universe, so kudos to Naughty Dog there. The relationship between Nathan and Sam is the driving force for this story. Sam could in many ways be seen as a reflection of Nate's more negative traits. His ruthlessness, which, don't you worry, we're going to delve very far into in part 3, his obsession with treasure hunting that causes others danger, and his impulsiveness that leads to the downfall of goodness knows how many ancient structures. A lot of the groundwork in developing this relationship is found in the game's flashbacks. Presented within these flashbacks is a typical younger, older brother dynamic. Sam is reckless and a magnet to trouble, whereas Nathan seems the more mature, rational brother. Sam's means to an end mentality foregrounds the idea that he is going to meet a tragic end. This makes the last few chapters more impactful, as I truly believe that Sam would meet a tragic, albeit poetic end similar to Rafe, and so I was really relieved when Nate managed to save him. I think this is one of the only instances in the Uncharted series where I felt for sure we were going to lose one of the main cast, aside from perhaps Sully's fake out on Uncharted 3, which nearly got me. Game, you can't do that to me, not with Sully. I could discuss the dichotomy between Sam and Nathan for pages, and go on and on and on, but I said I wanted to keep this succinct, and so I will touch on one very last important aspect about Sam. Sam is the game's primary antagonist. Okay, bear with me. Please don't go. I have a point here. Sam isn't the typical villain found in the previous Uncharted games, or in other media which it tries to replicate. However, he is the antagonist that establishes and drives the game's narrative. At the start of the game, we see that Nathan really has left this life behind. So much so that the motif of the militia job is used to demonstrate that Nathan is very reluctant to go back to a life of crime, even on a safe, albeit permitless plunder job. We know that Nathan at times longs for past adventures based on a scene with Elena, but if not for Sam, he wouldn't have acted on those impulses. Sam's re-emergence in Nathan's life is what shifts the equilibrium, as he presents Nathan with a scenario that forces him to act on an impulse that could jeopardise his relationship, peaceful new life he lives, and quite literally, his life. Sam is manipulative and uses Nathan to serve his own selfish gains. He also double-crosses Rafe in doing this. He was brought out of jail after all because Rafe needed him to help find the treasure, and it is Sam that really epitomises the idea that this is a truly character-driven story. It's simply brilliant. What I found really interesting was in the process of writing this critique, it turns out that Sam was intended to be the villain in Amy Hennig, a director that left the game during its production's initial script. The story is more centered around Sam getting revenge on Nathan for leaving in Panama. I think what we got in the end was definitely better, but I just thought this was an interesting bit of background information and already gives you the idea that Sam was intended to be in some way an antagonist. My overall favourite sequences found in the game is the auction, one of the earlier missions. Does this section flex Naughty Dog's ability to create an immersive atmosphere, but it also provides some excellent character moments, whether it be in Nate and Sam's attempts to steal a keycard, Sully and Rafe at the auction, or the sheer amount of sass Nate gives to Nadine. This felt very memorable as it distinguishes itself from other Uncharted sections. Let's just take a look at this moment between Sully and Rafe.
10 years. 12.
15.
It's amazing. All these years gone by, here we are, we're still haggling over dead people's junk.
Really? Aren't you running your parents' business?
My business now. But yes, that is my day job.
Oh, that is one hell of a day job. And a nice
Just hold on, Sully. How'd you find out about it?
It? What it is that, Rafe? Nadine, I think your partner here has had too many Bloody Marys.
Cut the bullshit, old man. I don't know how you scammed your way in here, but if you think about bidding on Avery's Cross, I can tell you exactly how you're going to be leaving in a goddamn
Rafe.
body. Well, you get my point.
Naughty Dog, for the first time here, in my opinion, has managed to create a successful protagonist who has a lot of depth and reasoned arguments for going for the treasure. I've dedicated a section to Rafe in further detail in part 2, but what I will say here is that in the aforementioned scene with Sully, we get to see a number of sides to Rafe. Firstly, and probably most important, he is trying to claim the treasure by legal means. This is a first. It is only when our characters sabotage the auction that Rafe resorts to violence. Now, look, I'm not saying he is a shining beacon of morality or anything, we certainly don't see that, but it adds some much needed depth to his character. We also see how he threatens Sully, only playing it off as a joke so as to not cause a scene. The voice actor does a great job of building tension here, and by putting a universally beloved character in Sully in this position, also clearly underlines that Rafe is the antagonist, the villain of the story. Well, one of at least, as we've seen. Okay, so generally speaking across the board, Uncharted 4 does a pretty damn good job of showcasing its excellent characters. Sam is introduced seamlessly, and for once we have an antagonist with depth. And then we have Nadine. Now, let me preface this. I know Nadine is further explored in later Uncharted media, but here I'm just looking at how she is introduced, presented and developed in Uncharted 4. Nadine unfortunately stands out amongst the cast, as her lack of character development or significant character in general is incongruous to every other experience we get. Whether by design or not, Nadine is shown to be an expert martial artist, one of the few characters actually not interested in the treasure, and that's about it. The only other real thing we know from her is from a bit of miscellaneous dialogue from Elena, who tells us that Nadine has inherited Shoreline, her private army, from her father, and that unfortunately, they've made some recent losses due to some civil wars that have gone wrong. Thanks, Elena. I guess this bit of exposition was meant to give us some insight into her motivations for the story, but as you'll see in part 3, this really doesn't hold up. Unfortunately, Nadine comes across as a blank slate, quota-filling character who adds little to the narrative. Her dynamic with Rafe is underdeveloped and certainly could have been more interesting, but never gets the attention it needs. Okay, so all in all, I have to say that Uncharted 4 is a triumph in terms of character building. The cutscenes are purposeful, equipped with the charm and humour that players of the series have come to appreciate, more so than in any previous title. The characters for the most part have a newfound depth, acting beyond just springboards for Nate's humour. With that being said, no matter how well Uncharted 4 excels from a cinematic standpoint, it still has an obligation as a video game to fill upon years of gaming expectations. So, how does the gameplay hold up? Part 2. Gameplay prioritising storytelling. As a byproduct of Naughty Dog's choice of storytelling, the gameplay also feels different this time around. Long gone are the back-to-back arenas loaded with enemies, obligatory supernatural bullet sponge late game bosses, and a world designed with set pieces at the forefront. Instead, Uncharted 4 feels a lot more mature. Dare I say nuanced in its approach to its gameplay and the world that houses it. Gunplay is far less frequent this time around, and enemies seem to be positioned less arbitrarily, unlike in previous titles, where somehow in the unexplored tomb, which is very unexplored, enemies seem to emerge because the gameplay loop required it, and well, it's a video game, so let's not worry about logic. This time, the enemies are placed in for the most part strategic spots, blowing up different areas in search of the treasure trail, just like our protagonists. This is to say, they are in places that make narrative sense, and aren't 9 levels deep in some random tomb, thank God. And when we do eventually get drawn into gunfights, it's actually quite enjoyable this time. The gunplay is tight, the playground is far more expanded, with multiple paths and the new grappling hook, as well as some finally viable stealth mechanics. The omission of the aforementioned supernatural bullet sponge late game bosses is also welcome. Okay, that's the last time I'm going to say that again. With all these changes making the gameplay feel fairer and undoubtedly more varied. I actually looked forward to the combat for the first time in the series, although there are some narrative problems that yet again the style of combat elected for does create, which we'll get to in part 3. When we are not filling enemies with lead, or breaking necks, we are exploring some truly beautiful and diverse locations that are noticeably bigger than previous titles. Whilst not quite open world, the expanded choice of pathways across the linear maps is a welcome addition. For the first time in the series, I truly felt as if I was charting areas. Not sure about that one. I found myself often taking a moment to step back and appreciate the beautiful world, that Naughty Dog had expertly crafted. I endeavoured to explore every waterfall, dimly lit cave and remote island to discover any secrets that they may hold. For once, searching for the obligatory treasure collectibles felt worthwhile. Not that they had suddenly gained significant gameplay value, but rather because they acted as an excuse for me to spend as much time as possible exploring the world. Another change which I welcomed is that for the most part, Nate is not alone this time, as he is accompanied throughout most missions with a companion or two. This was definitely the right choice, with the banter between the characters helping mask moments where the pace slowed dramatically, which it definitely does. Saying that, I hope I never hear anyone tell me to push a box again. This decision particularly benefits Sam's character development, as the dialogue exasperates the differences between him and Nathan, which creates an important and relevant dynamic that spans across a large portion of the game. Flashbacks, as mentioned, are also a thing here, and for the most part are also excellent at spotlighting the brothers' relationship and bringing their motivations for finding the treasure full circle. Of course, Sam's prison break is particularly memorable, not so much because it reinvents the gameplay wheel in any manner, but rather as it sets up the story, with the debt to crime lord Hector Alcazar being the right level of motivation to get Nathan back for one last hunt. Of course, actually placing us in Sam's shoes makes the recount of events that he gives to Nathan unquestionable. We experienced it in the game, and as such we have no initial reason to doubt it. When it later turns out that Sam had made this whole story up, the revelation is far more shocking and impactful, due to us as players being exposed to the gameplay sequence. This is another way in which Naughty Dog managed to successfully utilise the gameplay to enhance the narrative. The game also pays special attention to the treasure this time. Compared to previous titles, I found myself far more invested in the mystery behind Avery's treasure and Libertalia. This is due to the way in which the game world has been designed to facilitate the player's curiosity. There are plenty of opportunities to discover notes, artifacts and optional conversations that contribute further to the story behind the treasure, and this made me feel as a player like I was gradually unravelling a great mystery. Whereas in previous entries, the mystery, such as Shangri-La, while serving as a narrative beat, ultimately only really is experienced and relevant in the final few chapters when we are actually there. In Uncharted 4, Libertalia feels a lot more alive and prominent throughout the story, as the world leading up to it not only reminds you of its supposed existence, but then later on the gameplay allows you to experience it far more than any of the previous locations found in the previous games. The aforementioned slow pace enables the player to explore Libertalia as they wish, and given the latter part of the game takes place solely on the island, by the end it feels like we genuinely experienced a lost pirate colony. Now, of course, we did experience Shangri-La and the Atlantis of the Sands. I'm not even going to bother with El Dorado, but these sequences are in the midst of the game's climax. We never get a true opportunity to take a step back and take it all in. One example of this is found in one of the optional conversations between Sam and Nathan upon first discovering Libertalia. They take a moment to sit down and take in their discovery, like the pirates would have. These calmer moments make the location feel far more alive, as opposed to having to move across Shangri-La at a breakneck pace so as not to succumb to the indigenous Yeti cosplaying natives. Now, on the flip side, when the pace does quicken as we move towards the final chapters, there is still that sense of epicness as we swing across broken pirate ships, wade and weave between water and enemy, and swashbuckle with Wraith. These sequences of course do mix up the gameplay, but also serve a greater narrative purpose. As I mentioned, Libertalia and Avery's treasure is greatly relevant to the story. The game's title's duality is that it reflects both Nathan and Avery. In the same sense, the final climatic battle between Nathan and Wraith mirrors the conflict between the pirates, and the late game introduction of a new mechanic in the form of sword fighting demonstrates that the gameplay in this Uncharted has been crafted to supplement the narrative. The sequence provides excellent character development for Wraith, with his acknowledgement of his privileges and determination to be the one to ascertain the treasure, propelling him above prior antagonists. Just like Nathan, Sam and the pirates, his motives at the most banal level are the same: discovery. The archaic, anachronistic choice to resolve their conflict over a duel also reflects the fact that this endeavour, their obsession, is outdated and unhealthy. Nate's loss in the duel isn't seen as a victory for Wraith, but rather a concession by Nate that this life is no longer for him, and that perhaps if he were to continue on that path, he would meet the same fate as Avery and the other pirates. Okay, I may have gone a bit overboard there. Another staple of the Uncharted series is its use of frequent, action movie-esque, logic-defying set pieces. The train sequence from Uncharted 2 and the crashing plane from Uncharted 3 are moments that myself and many other gamers will never forget. In many ways, they perfectly encapsulate the light-hearted, thrilling and narratively thin plots of the first 3 games. These sequences are a ton of fun to play and are best not analysed too deeply from any sort of logical basis. They are in there not to serve as some deep plot point to show Nathan's struggles, whether it be to find a treasure or to protect a loved one, but rather to provide an unforgettable, dopamine-fueled gaming experience. And that is okay. Uncharted 4, on the other hand, has a more deep narrative, The story it's telling goes beyond the surface level, and of course, as a result, the way in which set pieces are used here are different to the previous titles. For starters, the set pieces are less frequent, and feel better interwoven within the story. If we look at Uncharted 3 for example, the ship sequence there, where Nate has been captured by a pirate called Ramses, feels tacked on, and diverts the narrative so as to provide what is essentially an extended set piece spanning across multiple chapters. And with the knowledge that in the development of Uncharted 3, the set pieces and maps were produced before the narrative, this section makes a lot more sense. Ultimately, the sequence contributes little to the narrative, and it shows in this example that Naughty Dog had prioritised gameplay over the story. Now, the opposite is true in Uncharted 4. If we look at arguably the most bombastic set piece, the car chase in Madagascar, we can see how the story bears greater relevance. Going into this set piece, it is already established that Sam is in danger. We know that Rafe has sent his men after us already, having been bombarded with tanks attacking Nathan and Sully in the street. Already there is a sense of anxiety in the player, as we know that Sam is experiencing a similar adversity. As such, when we speed through the streets of Prince's Bay, not only are we as players immediately invested because of the excellent gameplay, but also due to the fact that we need to save Nathan's brother, who he has only just reunited with, the brother who he failed to protect in the past. Now, admittedly, in Uncharted 3 we are trying to save Sully, but due to how drawn out the missions are across the set pieces, it is hard to stay focused on the main goal, to save Sully. The sheer amount of enemies thrown at you is tedious, and may be frustrated rather than invested, and that's a result of the gameplay taking precedence over the story. In the end, of course, Sully was never there and the whole section is quickly forgotten about. Both sequences are an exhibition to show off Naughty Dog's ability to create engaging set pieces, doused with colourful explosions and a cacophony of violence. But in Uncharted 4 the sequence serves a greater narrative purpose, as a result of this game putting its characters and their relationships above anything else. Whilst you could argue that Uncharted 2 and 3 had more memorable gameplay sequences, I found myself still more invested emotionally in the more sparse set pieces found in Uncharted 4. I feel there was only one genuine instance where Naughty Dog really missed the mark in their endeavour to prioritise the story over the gameplay, and unfortunately one chapter suffered as a consequence of this. The Brothers Drake chapter, the final flashback in the game, serves one very core purpose, to provide an origin to the name Drake. I really liked how this revelation came to be, however, this was after enduring a painfully boring, drawn out gameplay sequence. Breaking into the mansion did not offer any sort of unique gameplay challenges, with the sequence feeling incredibly drawn out. Now, I have previously praised the slower sections when juxtaposed with the fast action and set pieces. Unfortunately, this section greatly overstays its welcome, with everything feeling padded out to serve this one loose thread, that being the origin of the name Drake. I feel it would have been far better to have utilised an extended cutscene here in place of the gameplay, perhaps barring the police chase, which, to be honest, felt incredibly unrealistic. I know, even in an Uncharted game. Furthermore, this sequence comes right after the discovery of Libertalia. Feels like a distraction at best. I understand what they were going for, but it does feel like the balance between storytelling and fun was too misaligned here. Speaking of misalignment. Part 3, Ludonarrative Dissonance. I had initially entitled this section Tonal Dissonance, until I had discovered that there was a term for what I'm about to speak about. So far, we have established that the game puts a remarkable amount of effort into pushing a character-focused narrative. That's gameplay acts as a subordinate to its storytelling. Except when it doesn't. Whilst Eldorado's plague didn't reach beyond the island in the first game, the series still has been plagued with one glaring issue since its inception. Nate kills a lot of people. Now, before we begin, I realise this is a video game, and typically in games we do kill people. It would be tiresome to go through and scrutinise every game and every game character for racking up insane kill counts. Look at Link, who acts as the hand of natural selection for the wildlife of Hyrule. Nate and Link and many other game characters kill. So why am I singling Uncharted out here, and specifically Uncharted 4? You see, the Uncharted series, whilst not realistic, is grounded within a world similar to ours. Beyond the supernatural elements of the initial trilogy, which the game goes out of its way to try and qualify as scientific phenomena, the games are set in a universe that looks very, very similar to ours. And as such, I think it is fair to apply our morals and societal values onto this game world. Consequently, I find it extremely problematic when I take a step back and think about the fact that Nate and co are ruthless, brutal, and almost too eager to go with the lethal choice. Now, I am strictly speaking about the gameplay here. I was hoping with the expanded stealth mechanics introduced in Uncharted 4 that a non-lethal approach would be genuinely viable, and in many ways, I thought this is where Naughty Dog was heading. That was until I approached my first victim, and Nathan proceeded to snap his neck with all the callousness of a bona fide villain. This is problematic, very problematic. I assumed that at the point where I had them within a sleeper hold, there would be an option to concuss them. Now, at times it does feel like this can be done. However, because of the contextual animations, there is no option to elect for a chokeout of sorts, and sometimes I found myself snapping necks, and other times I was kicking people off cliffs, like some sort of Spartan. Don't even talk to me about Assassin's Creed Odyssey. There's a whole other video for that. Why I find this so troubling is that, previously mentioned in part 2, the game goes out of its way to make sure that the gameplay complements the story. the characters, and everything that Naughty Dog is trying to achieve. So why on earth is my playable Nate resorting to the most violent option seemingly at all times? This completely contrasts and undermines the character presented in the game's cutscenes and non-combat gameplay sections. The fact is, the game's combat presents Nathan as a violent, ruthless killer, which took me completely out of the game at times. Now, there are two arguments I can think of here to suggest why this isn't as big of an issue as I am making it. Point one being, it's a game, and I'm reading too much into the gameplay. So I do realise a lot of people probably won't even care about these aforementioned immersion-breaking issues. They will enjoy the game for what it is, and that's that. That I felt was a more reasoned argument for the 3 previous games, and here is why. Uncharted 1 to 3 are homages to Indiana Jones-esque action films. They are not to be taken too seriously, and the games demand you just go along for the ride, rather than take any philosophical detours. But Uncharted 4 is not in the same mould as any of these games. It is not a mindless adventure filled with banter, explosions and over-the-top bad guys. It's a thoughtful character study filled out with banter, explosions and genuinely interesting bad guys. In the previous section I commended Naughty Dog for their efforts in gameplay design, and how that supported and elevated the narrative and world in which the gameplay takes place. Here it seems that they then ask you that you don't worry about the gameplay. This is just jarring. To demand so much investment from one element of the game, and then to ask you to switch off for the other half is insane. Neil Druckmann, Vice Director and Creative Director at Naughty Dog, in response to the criticism of ludonarrative dissonance, states, "It's a stylized reality where the conflicts are lighter and death doesn't have the same weight." Death doesn't have the same weight? Okay then, why later in the game is the idea of Sam shooting Nadine so dramatized? After all, she is in that moment a direct threat to Nathan and Sam, more so than half of the Shoreline guards, who at times are just standing around, and could have easily been avoided. This response seems inconsistent with the narrative being presented. Another example I could cite is when in the prison flashback at the start of the game, Rafe murders a guard in cold blood. This moment is again implemented to distinguish Rafe from Nathan and Sam, who are alarmed by it, and rightly so, which suggests that murder is a big deal to them. I think if Naughty Dog were being direct, it is just easier to not worry about things like I'm doing right now. After all, gunplay is fun and is there to add excitement, but this would not be so frustrating if the rest of the game wasn't so finely combed through. Every detail feels truly significant, which is a compliment by the way, and so this level of laziness here is just more disappointing because this game is so character driven. Point 2 is, these guys are mercenaries that we face. Shoreline, which is a really strange name for a private army, are bad guys. This is true as far as we can tell. All we really know about these guys is that they work for Nadine and by association Rafe, they have lost a lot of civil wars recently, and they are a private army for hire. Okay, cool. Well, Nathan and co are thieves who kill, so here we are comparing an army who kills and thieves who kill. It's not that much of a stark difference, in my opinion. At times, it could be argued that our protagonists act in self-defense, which yes, they do have to sometimes. These enemies are incredibly trigger happy. Saying that, there are instances where Nate and co are approaching the enemies. Now here, we are essentially instigators. And yes, we do have to be instigators. There is no option just to sneak past in the gameplay and avoid conflict altogether. This is where I find the issue of ludonarrative dissonance most prevalent. I think we can forgive Naughty Dog and the characters and set pieces, such as car chases, as conflicts really cannot be avoided. But I feel there is a missed opportunity to enable elements of gameplay fit the tone presented in the narrative more consistently for players such as myself. Whether that be including a non-lethal option, more emphasis on melee, or just less enemies in general with guns. Again, my opinion. Because of this dissonance, I found one moment late in the game lost any narrative significance it was trying to hold. Nadine's decision to stop pursuing the treasure at the last minute is based on the idea that she has lost too many men already. Oh, she would be correct. She has lost way too many of her soldiers. I did my best not to question the logic of her private army's ridiculous numbers, but even after the Scotland section, which is our first major encounter with Shoreline, the amount of men lost is literally ridiculous. And we go on to take an enormous amount of Shoreline mercs throughout the game, as they are literally the only antagonists we face there on in. Whether Naughty Dog were trying to make this moment significant for Nadine's character by suggesting she cares about her men's lives, it still fell dramatically flat. It made her seem stupid, to be honest. Like, really? She must have realised her work socials were getting smaller and smaller in between every mission. I digress. Point being with all of this is that ludonarrative dissonance is a problem that afflicts many games in different ways. The reason I'm so overtly critical here in Uncharted 4 is because in every other facet, the game excels at storytelling, whether through world building, Nathan's amazing animations in the mission Marooned, or in all the optional conversations. I just feel that Naughty Dog could have done better here. Not in making the gameplay more fun, because it already is pretty great, but rather being creative in finding ways in which they can make the gameplay ensure every single time it matches the narrative they're trying to present, so that we don't have this tonal dissonance, or ludonarrative dissonance as it's actually called. If it wasn't clear already, I really did enjoy my time with Uncharted 4. A Thief's End in many ways is a fantastic payoff to the franchise, and I can only imagine how it felt for those who have been players for the series for over 9 years at the time of this game's release. This game provides a truly cinematic experience that is seldom found in other games. It brings gameplay storytelling to a whole new level, well, at least when guns aren't involved. I was genuinely sad to say goodbye to Nathan and the crew, and I'm oh so eager to dive straight back into the franchise when I can with The Lost Legacy. I mentioned at the start of the critique that this game was a more somber tale, but it is also funny, heartfelt and effortlessly endearing. A beautiful adventure that I was so sad to see end, but grateful for every step of the way. It was a truly unforgettable gaming experience that I can't believe I held off for so long. I am Michael JH, and this has been my retrospective critique for Uncharted 4, A Thief's End. Whilst my journey with the game has ended, the conversation will always continue. Let me know your thoughts down below, how this game impacted you, whether my ludonarrative dissonance argument was ludicrous, and we can revel in how much we all hated pushing those goddamn boxes.